was born in Akron, Ohio, in 1940, and spent most of my life in Akron, Ohio, and summers in western Maryland on my grandparents' farm. Uh, and I began, as a teenager, I began to work at a camp, which was, I thought was just for money. And it turned out the camp was for, at the time, the folks, they were called crippled children. And I didn't know it was for crippled children until I arrived there. And I loved it. And I guess, you have needs. And the kids were so good at fulfilling my needs. I needed to be, I didn't think very much of myself, and that's the truth. And the kids made me feel wonderful. Like, number one, because I needed to be a helper, and so they were great. Not only were they good about me being a helper, which made me feel better, but they actually liked me. So they taught me a whole bunch of things that I began to realize at about 50. That that number one, life wasn't all about me.
It isn't?
No. And then they were so good at, and I think God's in the middle of that. They were so good at making me feel worthwhile.
The kids at the camp?
Yes. And then, of course, I stayed there because I liked it. But I stayed for 9 years, ended up directing the camp, and, didn't even know it until, a kid came that I hired who was number one disabled and number two black. And I never knew that there were no other black kids hired there until he showed up as an adult at my house in Tarrytown here, and to say thank you. And I was like, because I just hired him because he was good. But anyway, I stayed there for 9 years. Made lots and lots of mistakes. In the middle of all that, I went through college, got a job, all that.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Kent State University before the problems at Kent State. The biggest thing we used to do to protest, I used to ride on the back of John DeGroot's motorcycle, and we'd ride through the through
the quadrangle, or
no through the ROTC while they were marching, and we would sing MICKEYMOUSE.
What year was that?
Oh, it had to be between 58 and 62.
Okay.
Probably 60, 61. Yeah. And then I went to work in St. Louis. I was very lucky at school. A guy came from special school district in St. Louis in March of the year I graduated, and he hired me and one other gal to come down there after we graduated. So I never have had the thing of being unemployed, and I don't know what that's like, what people face.
What did you study? What was your course of study at Kent State University?
Well, part of that was hooked with camp. First of all, somebody at camp helped me get a grant so that books and tuition were paid for 4 years. So now that grant would seem like nothing today. I mean, for 4 years, I got a $4,000 grant, and that paid for my books and my tuition for all 4 years. And I majored. I wanted to do something. I really love these kids at camp, so I wanted to do something that could help them. And so, what occurred to me was, if I went to school, I could actually help some of those kids. So I went to school in speech and language, speech pathology and audiology.
That was you got a bachelor's in that?
I did.
And
And at that school, at the time, there were two certifications. There was a basic certification that advanced, and if you got through Kent, you got an advanced certification, which was the same as most places getting a master's.
okay.
So-
Okay. So you were ready, you were certified to teach.
Oh, yeah.
didn't it?
Yeah. I graduated on a Saturday and started work on Monday.
And the
I
first
moved from Ohio to St. Louis.
to St. Louis. So your first job was in St. Louis.
Yeah.
And what population of children were you teaching?
I was teaching for special school districts, so I taught in a school, Park School, I think it's closed now. I taught in a school that had a wing of TMR, which was trainable mentally retarded, was the terms we were using, and a wing of EMR, educable mentally retarded, two classes of emotionally disturbed kids. You could always tell the teacher because he had all the pencils in his pocket. And a wing of orthopedically handicapped kids.
Okay.
So I was speech person for all of those.
Okay. And how long did you stay in St. Louis with that
I
special school?
taught there for, say, 62, 63, 5 years.
Okay. And then what? And then where did you go from there?
Well, see, in the middle of that, there was the ideal American marriage that fell apart. And so when I left there, I took the geographic cure. I just said, I'm getting out. Because my wife and I had split and I was falling apart. So I got in the car, I resigned. And I got in the car and drove to Ohio, to where my parents live. And then I went back to camp, of course, because that was where I loved. And somebody said, well, where are you going to work next year? And I said, oh, the reality was hitting. So I said, well, I'd like to work on the East Coast. So once again, I was so lucky. I came to New York, took 2 days, a long weekend off from camp. Came to New York, had set up, I had 4 interviews and got 12 job offers.
Oh my goodness.
It was the right time to be in special ed.
And that was where in on the East Coast?
Near the city, and I actually, because I had done theater, I'd done a lot of theater, and so I took a job in Wappingers Falls, New York, because I thought my theater friends would howl that I was living in Wappingers Falls, New York. So that's how I got there.
Is that close to New York City?
It's in Dutchess County, not too far, about an hour from New York, and I hated it. I didn't like the district. I didn't like their philosophy. So I worked there 1 year because you have to fulfill your commitments. And then I went...
Was this to get certified with the state of New York, or what do you mean by that?
No, because I had committed to a year's
So
contract.
you did your year on the school.
So anyway, then in the spring, I came down to Westchester County, which is closer to New York, and I got a job, and then I resigned because I knew I had a job. And I shouldn't tell this, but when I went in to resign, the assistant superintendent at Wappinger said, he said, don't expect, because I had fought with him a lot, don't expect a recommendation from me. And I said, I would never ask you because I only ask people I respect. So anyway, then I worked here for the rest of the time. until I retired in '96
And here is where? Where did you
in
work?
Westchester County
Okay.
at the Board of Cooperative Educational Services.
Is this Westchester County that we're in right
Yes.
now? We are. York County.
Yeah.
And did you continue basically as a speech and language and
No, I did
clinical
not.
audiologist? What?
Speech and language therapist. No. When I came here, they were starting an experimental school for disturbed children. And so they said, would you ever think of taking a classroom? And I said, I'll try anything twice. So I was in a school where a guy, I mean, they were really trying an experiment. There was a pilot who had one class, a guy who owned a toy store had a class, I had a class, and a gal who was an artist had a class, and then there was one teacher who failed miserably in the place. But I was there for a couple of years before I had the accident, and then
Let's talk about the accident. What is the accident? What is that?
well, I would like it to be a motorcycle accident or a football accident. I fell off of a swing. I had this little boy, Danny, who was afraid of everything. I don't know. Somebody had taught him to be fearful of even playing ball, of anything. I mean, he was just frightened. I have my own opinions as to who caused that, but that's not right. And anyway, so it took me all year to get him to even chance sitting on a swing. And then we sat and we gradually began to, if I would sit on the next one, we would swing. And then it got, finally, by May, we were really ripping. And one day I was out swinging with him, trying to get him going. And the S hook came out of my swing. And I came down on blacktop. And I knew life had changed.
But you were collapsed, but then there was more because you had to get those kids back to the school.
You bet I had to get him in. So I got up and walked into the school and got him off the swing and got him in class. And then we called the ambulance once they were in.
And not to be too detailed, but what injury did that cause you?
I broke my spine. I broke the bones in my spine. And set me into a very long recovery period.
What period? How long were you in recovery?
Oh, I was in the hospital for almost a year. But I came back, and the doctor said I went back too soon, but I came back to school, and the first thing I did, because I was using a chair at that time, I went out to the swing, and I got on the swing to show Danny.
On the horse?
There was no panic.
So here was the kid who was afraid of everything, and then your swing broke.
Uh-huh. Wow. And made him afraid of that. But anyway, then I went back in January and made it till, it happened in May, and I forced myself back in January. The kids were wonderful because I couldn't do things. And these are really supposedly rough, nasty kids. And I didn't have to bend to open a drawer. They were there doing it. I had a bed in my classroom because I had to teach social studies lying down in the afternoon because I couldn't make it. The district was very nice to let me come back. And I made it again from January till March and couldn't do it. So then it was off again.
Was this what year?
Well, it happened in 68. 68. So this is 69. And then I loved the classroom. I loved teaching in the classroom. I was surprised that I liked it so much. But when I came back from that, the next fall, they asked if I would be itinerant and do speech and language, which I did for another, I don't know. And then 12 years before I retired, a friend of mine who I taught with was pregnant. And so she was leaving, and she taught gifted special ed kids. And they were fun. I had a good time going there. I was the speech pathologist for them. And anyway, and then they had hired some other lady to come in there. And the other lady got cancer. So they said to me, would you take the class for 2 weeks until we can find somebody? And 12 years later, I retired. I loved it. I loved the kids.
You had a little brother who was.
Oh, that's well. Okay, go on.
Back when, and he was. I don't know if he was a genius or he was gifted. What was your brother's name?
Paul.
Paul.
I have two brothers, but that one's name was Paul.
And I remember a story. He was very, very young when he spoke.
His brain was developing much faster than his body could. And so, yes, oh, he spoke very early. But then we all did. I talked at 6 months. And haven't stopped since. That was not unusual in our family to talk.
But when he first spoke, he said something sort of.
He said it when a cracker. They're up in the cupboard.
That was his first
Yes.
thing that he said.
Yes. So
And how old was he?
I think he was about 4.5 months old. He was sitting in a high chair, which he could at that point. But anyway, then by the time he was 8 months old, his brain was developing tremendously, but his skull was not. And so it threw him into seizures. And they thought at first it might be meningitis, so we were quarantined for that. But it wasn't. So they finally decided to go and cut the skull to allow it, and he died in the process. Yeah.
You had a long background in teaching disability, and suddenly you were on the other side of that.
Yes.
And
It was good preparation in a way. It's strange when you become disabled.
because you weren't at one time.
No. But,
Why do you say it's strange?
well, because people treat you like a piece of furniture. I went into a shopping center one time and this man said, hello, how are you? And I'd never been there before. And I said, hello, how are you? And he said, oh, it's good to see you again. I said, I've never been here before. And he said, yes, I remember the chair. So suddenly you're remembered as a piece of furniture. I don't like that. Also, people ask if somebody was pushing me and we were at a cafeteria or something. The best one was, does he eat peas? And I'm like, ask me, you idiot. But I tried to be nice. And because it puts you in the situation, if you can't do it, you'll put up with a lot.
If you can't
If you can't do, if you can't go to the bathroom by yourself,
get up the stairs,
you'll put up with a bunch of abuse because you still got to pee.
you gotta go.
And that's the way it is.
So that must have been a big transition for you, because
No, yes.
But prior to your becoming disabled, you were a very active person, right? I mean,
I'm still active.
but I mean, you were physically riding horses and doing
Oh,
things
sure.
that were not.
Doing farm work, bouncing around.
And you had grown up. You were raised Mennonite.
I was. My mother was Mennonite. My father had been, I think his family was Methodist, but when the Methodists married the Mennonite, we went toward the Mennonite.
And was that a very strict upbringing?
Yes.
How so?
Well, first of all, God was extremely stern. Now, that's in the 40s, and maybe God was stern with everybody. I don't know. But definitely a man with a long beard who carried a book and kept records, mostly of what you did wrong. Um, uh, and I suppose it was strict. We couldn't wear buttons. We had to wear hooks and eyes, and you could wear. Look out if I'm profane. I don't mean to be, but you could wear black, gray, or sort of a shit brown. That were the colors, and I didn't like that. So when I went and see, we didn't live in an area where there was a Mennonite community. So the compromise at church was, because there were no Mennonites around where we were, they were at least an hour and a half away. My folks went to the Church of the Brethren, which is another step down the road to perdition. Another step toward mainstream. But so the ladies only wore the little bonnets in church. But it wasn't, people actually had buttons.
You had buttons.
And sometimes colors. Not
You
much.
didn't like the clothing, and what did you do about it?
Well, when I was going to go to, we were getting ready to go to junior high, and I went to my father and said, I don't want to wear these things anymore. And he said, then buy your own. So I went out and got a job. I mowed lawns with a hand mower for 25 cents per lawn. And in the neighborhood, I did use my dad's lawnmower, so he contributed in that way. And I bought my own clothes.
And so you got to dress more like the mainstream kids.
Yes, I guess.
Okay, so let's get to Heck. So talk about talk about what led you to starting Handicapped Encounter Christ.
I think God led. But I don't think he said, I have a mission for you.
Had you been doing other types of retreats?
I did. Oh God. Shortly after I was here in New York, of course I had to have another round of surgery on the back. And I got involved. I converted to Roman Catholicism, which was not popular with my parents, or most of the people I knew. But then I became super Catholic. You know what I'm saying? I was at a parish, and it was just when the Mass was changing into English. And so there was this little Franciscan priest who helped out at the parish, and I became a lector. And the lector actually did more than the priest did, because she ended up explaining everything, like, we used to do this, and now we do this. And then I started teaching CCD, and then I started being the coordinator of CCD, K through 8, and then suddenly it was the whole schmear. And so that some people in the church had been involved in a retreat movement called Cursillo, which is like a 4-day.
So what is Cursillo?
Cursillo is a 3.5-day journey with a tripod of piety, study, and action. and it's to help people. It was actually designed in 1949. It was designed for Spanish men who didn't go to church in Spain. Uh, and it was sort of a cloistered thing where the men, it was only for men, and it brought life back to the church, you know. So these guys at the church that I went to decided I should go, so I did. But it was a little tacky because there were a group who were on the retreat who were charismatics. And so everybody else had to sleep in a dorm, but I had a private room because I needed medical attention. I know that. And there was a Franciscan brother who would come and do the medical stuff at night. But then also with that, the guys would come in. There'd be about 5 of them. And they'd say, "Can we pray for you?" Well, you're a real son of a bitch if you say no, you know. So then they'd put their hands on me and they, you know, speaking in tongues. And then they'd back up. And I really wanted to please them. And I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe you could get up and get across the room. But you'll go back to the hospital if you do.
To show them you could walk?
Yeah, to make them happy. So, of course, I didn't. And it was a great disappointment to them. And I was told it was because I wasn't open enough to God. And then, of course, and then in the middle of it, you know, I'm going to physical therapy all the time. And I showed up about 4 weeks after the Cursillo at church, and I was walking with canes. And suddenly I became the miracle of Cursillo, because they knew it had to be them. That was
Not
doing
the therapy.
No, of course not. The therapy isn't miraculous. And God doesn't work through physicians and therapists. So that's, and then later in 1970, this retreat movement came along for teenagers called Keck, Teens Encounter Christ. And so I was asked to be on a team for that. Because I think I made Cursillo in 1968, or maybe 69. It's a long time ago. And anyway, I was on, you know, and one of the things that hit me hard on that was that one of the things somebody said was that God loves you as you are. And I, you know, the kids at camp, and I'm thinking, boy, do I know a crowd that needs to hear that. You know? So, you know, you don't have to walk, you don't have to jump, you don't have to be able to see. But God can still love you. So then I went to there was a, you understand, you know, we were Catholic. And so there always had to be layers of, and permission to be gotten. So Keck had a Keck council. Cursillo had a secretariat, and they still do. But Keck had a Keck council. So I went to the Keck council, and my proposal was, can we get 15 disabled kids and 15 non-disabled kids to go on a retreat together? I would be happy to give, whether I was on the team or not, I would be happy to come in and give a half hour of how you take care of each other, and then let them have the retreat together. Well, no. So we don't have doctors, and I'm saying they're not sick, they just can't move. You know, but that started a long process. That was in like 72, I think, when I first asked. So then the council came, because they thought I could never do that, it would never happen. The council came and they said, if I could get someone from the council to cooperate and be one of the directors, and if I could get nurses, they might let me do a retreat, but it would have to be separate. It would have to be a retreat on with the tech schedule, but it would be for only disabled folks. So then I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, this has got to work somehow. So that's when we began to think about that we should have an able-bodied person with the disabled person. So it just got bigger in number. And I found somebody on the tech council who would help. And I had been talking to John Salzman, who was a Franciscan priest and had been on tech, and Nancy Balaam, who was a Dominican nun specializing in special ed, who had been on tech. And then we would meet, and then we got Diane Marfiotti involved, who was somebody from the Tech Council. And finally, by April of '74, I was already in '73, but by April of '74, we were able to get a retreat going. And that's all I wanted to do was a retreat. And then in the middle of that, I thought, oh my God, people like it. We're going to have to do another one. So we did.
So that was here in New York?
Yes, sir.
And how did you distinguish what you were doing on what was then being called HECK, Handicapped Encounter Christ,
Yes.
and TECH? How did you distinguish the two?
Well, very early on. By the time we did the third HECK, it was very clear that we needed to go separately because...
And where were you going away in your own direction? What was your own direction, independent from TECH?
Well, number one, addressing flat out the issue of disability because it was not in the TECH schedule, And so we just added it. And they used to have a talk called the Universal Call to Holiness, which there had to be a religious, and there had to be a married couple, and being single was just not part of it. So, because if you're going to be Catholic, you better have babies, or be a priest. It didn't apply to these folks. So we changed that, and then the more we changed, the more they got angry at us. And at one point, somebody because I remember we had a meeting. They were calling me in front of the council. And Patty Colfer and Nancy stayed, because Nancy by then was in Boston, and Patty was in D.C. They stayed for the meeting, and they went in and spoke. Marty describes the meeting as was like a baseball game, and I was the baseball. And Sean Tracy was part of the council at that time, but he secretly was hanging with us. And anyway, and somebody told me that I had too many smart people on HECK, and I needed to get fewer smart people. They didn't like the fact that a lot of people were educated. Well, I didn't do that, But anyway, at that point, because then we were no longer tied to tech, then Patty Colfer and Francine Nolan, Rogers, she married Marty later, sat me down and taught me retreat design. And they said, okay, what do you want to cover? And so, and we came up with the schedule, pretty much the schedule we use today.
So weekend.
Yeah. We increased the time we were together because you couldn't, on the part of doing the teenage thing with tech was you kept kids up, because kids like to be up at 1 o'clock in the morning. So they would start the retreat on Saturday morning and pile all this stuff in until Monday afternoon. And that was just not working. So we added a half day. We started on Friday and got done on Monday. But the wonderful thing was they really taught me how to, and then we came up with a basic, I mean, they sat me down and they said, okay, what do we want to say to folks, and what do we want folks to learn?
And what did you want them to learn?
Well, first of all, I wanted to address the whole issue of, and they did too, of being broken, and that everybody is, and everybody's handicapped, and to address it flat out. You know, so that was an additional talk. And then this whole thing of the universal call to holiness, we saw it a little different than either becoming a nun or a priest or getting married. We thought maybe God was calling everybody to be holy. And so...
were there not a lot of marriages in the disabled population? And
of course not.
And not a lot of vocations?
None, because the church wouldn't take them.
So,
You know,
they had no business in the Catholic Church if they could be neither married nor clergy.
But I suppose they could have been married, but they never had the opportunities. I mean, you understand these folks that were raised in an institution, and able-bodied people paraded them out and took them to where they wanted them to go and took them back. I mean, there in the middle of all this, there was a tremendous uprising in civil rights, and disabled folks began to realize they had rights, which was new and different.
And there was a move to move these people.
Deinstitutionalize folks, yeah.
And I think did Heck sort of parallel that?
Well, I think we certainly were advantaged by that.
When you said you talked about disability on the retreat, so here you were with a whole group of people, and you needed to address disability head on.
And what's that mean? What's
So
it
rather
mean
than
to be?
dance around it or not talk about
Yes.
it or not mention it?
Yes, what's that mean to? What's it mean to be broken? And then the realization that everybody's broken.
That's a common denominator.
Yeah, and that maybe it's all right to be broken, and God loves broken things and people.
I think a lot of people suffer from problems with self-esteem, but I would think in this
Oh, there was
disabled
no
group.
self-esteem. There was none, which makes you very passive. And I learned that from my own problem. Like I thought I was a pretty normal human being. And suddenly, if you have to depend on somebody to dress you and let you go to the toilet and to get your food, they become extremely powerful.
Over you.
Well, just powerful because you got to survive. And so
So
you'll
you cede a lot of personal power to them.
tried to.
I mean, you let them sort of take over? Is that what you mean? Or
Well,
you have to. You have to.
I
can't
think
be in
you have
charge.
to. I don't know what there was a big push at the time for them. Well, then disabled people should run. They weren't able. They weren't ready. So you have to help people. Get there. It doesn't mean that you think of them as less. You just keep including. You keep including. And now able-bodied people and disabled people are part of the teams that when we prepare, and there isn't this little special group. And the hardest part would be, we had this man, I won't use names, but we had a man who was cerebral palsy, who wanted terribly to talk on a retreat. But he wanted to talk about how he should be able to date women who were able-bodied. Uh, and I kept saying no, because it's not appropriate. So then he would go to other places where Heck had started, like he went to Washington. John won't let me talk, and and I finally had to say, look, Jackie, nobody's interested in you're horny or not. I mean, and it doesn't have anything to do with making a retreat. We're talking about God here, not about your physical needs. So, and he thought I was terribly cruel to do that. But I would hope I would have said the same thing to anybody.
It couldn't just be what everybody wanted. It had a specific focus.
Well, and you got to be able to do it. You know, and I mean, we right now we have loads of autistic folks who come, and they're very faithful about coming. And the group of autistic folks we have cannot and should not, be in leadership because they don't understand it and they don't have skills with people. So you try and teach skills, but
When what just to give a progress, so you started Heck in New York and then it expanded.
yeah, well,
where?
see, that were we started Heck in New York, and Patty Colfer she came because she was a friend of Saltzman, and an acquaintance of mine. So you're trying to get everybody you can to come and help. So she came up from Washington D.C. and I guess it was a positive experience for her because she went back to D.C. and she started bringing other people. And in a year, they were having retreats in D.C. Nancy at the time was a nun, and she was going to Boston to get her doctorate. And so she started bringing people from Boston that she met. And so we kind of became a training ground. And then Sean Tracy was transferred to Villanova. He was an Augustinian priest. And he started bringing people from there. So we sort of...
In what town?
Philadelphia, Villanova, Pennsylvania. So we started having people from there come. And they would bring them, and then those folks would get hooked, and they'd come back almost every time. And within and then Don Howard was on the first. He helped with food because on the very first Heck, you get a volunteer cook, and I think she was a little scared of the council, so she dropped 2 days before the retreat, and I think the council members thought, good, then they won't be able to have the retreat. And so we called Don, who was a lieutenant colonel at West Point, and he got the National Guard to come and cook and bring the food. They had walkie-talkies and jeeps. It was wonderful because you had to cook in one building and bring the food down. And he was transferred to Fort Huachuca in near Tucson, and then he wanted to get it one started there. So, I mean, people just happened to be in the room when we started, and then they took it wherever they went.
What other cities did Heck go to?
Oh, my. Well, I think it was first here, then I think Tucson was next, and then Sean got one going in Philadelphia, and then Nancy got one going in Boston. And then Dennis Kennedy, and who had come with Patty from Washington because he was in school at Catholic U, was transferred to Chicago, and so he got some other Vincentians, Mike Joyce, and Julie Cutter, who was a daughter of Charity. So they started in Chicago, and then then Dennis and Julie were transferred to St. Louis, so they started there, and a couple had come up from New Orleans to a Heck here in the summertime, one summer, and so they got started in New Orleans, and then folks in the Tucson Heck got on fire with it. So then Phoenix began and Santa Barbara began. Truthfully, some of those were very short-lived. And Mary Clark, who was a nun who came here, transferred to West Virginia and got the job as a special ed director. And so, it went to West Virginia. And but the tough part was she worked for the diocese. So the diocese wanted control. And so when she left that job, the whole emphasis on everybody coming was taken away because the next lady knew about mentally retarded. So she wanted it mostly for Down syndrome folks. And we kept saying, Jean Bonnier has these faith and light things for those guys, but she didn't want to do that. So when she took it over, so it died.
West Virginia didn't.
Well, it hung on for a while, but then it was in Santa Barbara, and that was that didn't make it. And then in the Napa Valley, it got started through Dennis's cousin, as a matter of fact. But he sort of ran it like it was a football game. For it was like we did it, like we, and it's like, and that of course they had 3 or 4, and then it, and somebody in Canada did it, but they put a team together and went into an institution and did it. And I got the article in the paper, and the only thing I recognized in the article was my name. So I got Rob, who did the mass the other night, to translate it for me. But it was really a very different look. It was, we should go help those poor cripples. So I never really thought much about it, but they called it Heck. And I got a letter one time from Toledo, Ohio, from this lady, and she wanted to know how much national dues were, because she had done several Hecks in Toledo and had been disciple sacristan on a couple, and I never even heard that term. I should say, and I think that's just why some of it happened. Springfield, Illinois did it, and someplace outside of Pittsburgh, and Columbus, Ohio, Cincinnati. But anyway, at one point, the National Office for Disability in the Catholic Church asked if I would write something. So I did. And it went out to every diocese, so of course, to lots of folks, it was, because they needed to wait for permission from the diocese. Then it became a thing that, okay, we can do this now. So everybody felt very comfortable putting their own spring on it.
And they did it in Carolinas, did you say?
Oh, it's in North Carolina, yeah, on Long Island. It's still going in North Carolina, I think.
And you went international with 2 countries.
Yes, we did. Well, besides Canada, I guess that's international. But I got a letter from this woman named Eileen Casey, who was a nun. And she asked if she could come to New York for a retreat. And I said, well, I think I could save you some airfare, because she was in Wisconsin. I said, why don't you go to Chicago? I'm going to be there in 2 weeks and have a retreat there. And she did. And And she got things started in Melbourne, Australia.
Did you go to Melbourne?
I did. Susie and Lois and I went.
And was that a lot different than?
There was a fun thing. I mean, it was some differences, but they really followed what we were doing, in Chicago and in New York, and they were just happy that we were there. And so,
In Australia.
yeah,
Okay.
and then Susie is from the Philippines, and so and she wanted to take it there, and we took it there once to a place called the House Without Stairs, which was some Belgian nuns had started residences for kids who were physically disabled, so they could go to. And I think that program actually started in Australia, but so kids could live someplace and go to high school or college. It would be accessible. So they invited us to one of their houses in Quezon City in Manila, and we went and did that, and then we went back again and did one in another one in Quezon City, and we did one in Davao, which is way south in the Philippines, in Mindanao, and one in Baguio, which is up north, and one in Iloilo, which is Susie's hometown. Mostly we did those with connections from Marino. So,
They're missionaries, the Marino.
of course, yes, it's American Mission Society.
Did you have to adapt Heck to what was going on culturally?
Of course.
In the Philippines? How so?
Well, first of all, in Davao, they didn't have chairs to sit on, so they cut palm logs, and kids sat on the folks who came sat on palm logs under an outdoor basketball corrugated roof. It gets very hot there, and they sat there all day, and we would speak in English, and then somebody would translate, and we would pray that they were translating what we said. I don't think we need to have a carbon copy, but I think we do need to have the ideas.
And the common ideas were what? The ideas that were common
Were that everybody's valuable, that everybody's broken, everybody needs God, and how you get there how they get all that across is up to them. So Philadelphia had, right here, and I loved Sean Tracy before he did, and still do. But he Sean's very creative, and so there were a lot of music and campfires and things like that we didn't do here. But I knew that he understood, and because the thrust was the same, but it was it the same format? No. Who cares?
at the point across.
And so when we would meet with group, when we would come together, in Philly and Boston and D.C. and New York, in the early days, we would just have a group of people sit down and figure out, people from everywhere, figure out what we were going to do together. But I have problems when people want to use the name and want to change the thrust. I don't care if the format is different, but one place, and I won't mention where, did a talk on the retreat about what it's like to be Miss Wheelchair Maryland. And I had a hard time, and still have a hard time, figuring how that fits into talking to folks about God. But the danger is, I think, always is to become a social justice, social issue crowd, you know, and I don't feel that we are called to champion the rights of disabled. I think we're called to enable people to champion their own rights. And I think that's a different approach. But I don't know. I could be wrong, and have been thousands of times.
So fast forward 40 years from when you started this in 1974. Did you think you'd be here still running this organization? And how has it morphed from what you started, if at all?
I think we've gotten more towards the ideas of what I hoped for. I'm older, lots older. But and then of course it's changed. People come and people go. But one of the things we learned is that all ages is fine. So you can have really old people, really young people. You know, it doesn't matter because God's messing with everybody.
I think I know how you're going to answer, but I want to ask you about. Where you're at now, and then, you know, if by chance you're not here on this earth forever, what would be your hopes for Heck in the future?
I would hope that people would listen to God, and I think God and folks can take care of it. And I hope when I die that somebody buries me because I bought the plot, or maybe hefty cinch sack over the back wall would be fine, because I believe that I'll be with God, and that's all that counts for me. And I believe that God could handle what happens with Heck.
Would you hope that it would continue after your...
I don't know. If there's a need, yes. If there's not, I mean, even the Inquisition stopped at some point.
Does it frighten you to die one day?
No,
Why?
because everything dies, and that's how life comes.
You've had a lot of both physical and, perchance, a
Mental.
little emotional suffering, and so.
Why?
But I mean, do you see this as a? Sorry.
How could one be afraid of going on and being a person? And I mean, even if all that happens, well, because nobody knows for sure, and even if all that happens is they put you in the ground and you become wonderful fertilizer for a tree, and the tree grows and somebody cuts that tree and builds a home out of it, what more could you want?
A plaque, maybe.
No, thank you.
Go ahead, ask about Matthew, because I don't understand the conversation. Go ahead, Tom.
John, could you explain?
I'll come over here.
Come here. Creation. I want you to stay where you're at.
Really?
The eyes,
Okay.
Yeah, because I gotta still check on the angles and stuff. Can you explain, real quickly, creation theology?
No.
The universe and
Sure, yes, okay.
History of the world.
how it fit in with Heck's philosophy.
I don't know. I mean, I know that I was living in a world that was changing. The 60s were a wonderful, and I found wonderful and stimulating new look at things. And some of it was crap and some of it wasn't. But there were people. I got interested in Teilhard de Chardin, who the church had shut up. And, because he talked about God being an omega point and all creation being drawn to it. But it was probably the some of what he was saying was the first time people that somebody said, we're not in this alone. There's the rest of creation, and we're part of creation, not above it. And then Carl Jung at the same time was writing stuff about uh, passed down traits, and Carl Jung was in Germany, and Teilhard de Chardin was in China, and it was like, ooh, yeah. That was going on, and people were starting to think, and people were starting to think for themselves, And then Matthew Fox is writing, and Bob Fox, Monsignor Bob Fox, is doing stuff in New York City, like the thing in the spring, and getting people to get out of their houses and get involved in community. I helped him with there was a thing it's called the thing in the spring, and we went into Harlem and cleaned out basements and cleaned out vacant lots, and to make community places, and to tell people, don't wall yourself up in your house, get out and be part of something. And that was great fun. Of course, I was still hanging. You're raised in certain ways. And I remember one night I was a quote unquote, this was very funny, a block artist at 100th Street. But I knew the people on 103rd Street, so I'd park my car there because it would be nice when you wanted to go home to have your car left. And I'm walking home, and it's about 11 o'clock at night, and I go past this doorway, and this arm comes out and grabs me and pulls me in, and it's a very large black man, and I was ready to shit. I mean, I was scared. And I said, just don't hurt me. I'll give you whatever I have, but just don't hurt me. And he said, I just wanted to say thank you.
Who was it?
It was just a guy from the neighborhood. Scared the crap out of me, and then I felt like crap because of the way I reacted.
But why was he thanking you?
Because I had been helping in the neighborhood.
Helping out.
And he just, as I went by, he saw me go by, and he grabbed me and,
Was he homeless? Or
No.
Just needing to talk
Just
to
very
you?
tall and very black. And I began to realize the prejudice ain't gone. I apologized like mad to him, and he was very kind. But that's the truth. And, it's a hard thing, and we're all still clumped up with that crap about people being superior to animals and plants and rocks, and and instead of understanding that it's all God. And Sean Tracy was wonderful to lead me down paths about all creation celebrating.
When you did the Heck retreats, at least from my memory, and I don't know what's changed, but I think every Heck ended with a similar, get out there and do something about
Amen.
it, to go
Yeah.
forth.
You need to do something, yeah.
And
Don't wait for somebody's permission.
Why were you telling people that at the end of each retreat?
Because, at least in Christianity, and that's the only one I can talk about. I don't know about Judaism. I don't know about, but it was like, we are the officials of Christianity. The church, the churches, even Protestant. We have the handle on it, and so therefore, if you have questions, come ask us. And that just seems to me that what we have to do is try and live this stuff, and that there isn't one way, and that we're never going to discover other ways unless we try them. And I'm not saying, I'm going to run out and hook up with the Jewish temple, they're gone, but I probably will be Christian all of my life because those are the symbols I was taught. And that's how I can see God, because I learned it that way. But Buddha said something many, many years ago. He said, one mountain, many paths. And I'm really happy to know that there are interfaith dialogues going on. That's how Thomas Merton got killed. I mean, the electric fan got him. Maybe it was God saying, don't do this. But anyway, because he was over trying to talk to the Dalai Lama. I just think we're so afraid to say what we don't know and to lay down and wallow in that. And allow ourselves to say, I'm not sure. I can maybe a little bit, teeny tiny bit, tell you what brings God and me together. But that may not be what it is for you or for anybody else. And I think that's remarkable. Because I believe that if anybody thinks they got God in their vest pocket, they're dead wrong. Dead wrong. I mean, there's this whole stuff on string theory.
Now explain that.
I can't.
But what is?
Because I don't know it.
But what is it?
But
basically?
the thing that impresses me is that string theorists are saying that the entire universe operates like a cell.
And that means
Like any cell that's part of us, part of a tree, part of, that it had, that things move in, move out, splits. It's, wow. I mean,
and they're applying string theory to theology? Is that what you're saying? Or?
I am. I think they're trying to explain the universe. I don't really give a shit about the universe, except because I think God's in the middle of all that. And I think we'll never know. It's just like we'll never know about the afterlife. Because
what do you think you'll say to God when you meet him one day?
I don't think it's a him, number one.
Okay.
Necessarily.
What do you think?
Might be. This whole concept of heaven and pearly gates and golden street, I do not see Jesus sitting by his pool. I think he'll be out and down and dirty, working with poor, here, somewhere. So if when I die, I am freed of this crazy body that I have, I mean, as handsome and gorgeous as it is, and I'm free to be with Jesus, who I believe is with the poor. What more could I ask?
Diet Coke and cigarettes.
Well, that's what will get me there. The cigarettes will kill me.
Sooner.
The Diet Coke will do it. No, but you know what I'm saying.
No, I got it.
I used to tease a friend, Annie Diggins. I'd say, Annie, where's heaven? And she'd say, up. And I'd say, what if you're in Australia? And she'd say, don't bother me about it. But she told me that she told her first grader, she had CCD kids in first grade, and one of them asked her what heaven was. And she said, honey, heaven's anything you want it to be. I could get off on the Muslim thing if you get 25 virgins, and if that's what heaven is heaven for you. Well, I hope they get it. Imagine 25 cricky women. No, anyway.
So to follow the through line, and I think I asked this question, but I'll ask it a little differently. At the end of a hack, you said, "Go forth. Don't fool
want
around."
people to Well, I suppose I would like it if they did more than one. I want them to go after God and let God mess with them. And where that takes them, that's up to them and God.
And so that's what you would say at the end of a heck. Is that your same advice at the end of a long life?
Hasn't been that long. Wait a minute.
What would you say for the next generation? What would you say? What would you leave them with your legacy?
I don't have a legacy. I think I would say to them, look for yourself and don't, and there are plenty of folks around who have insights that probably would help you. So I'm not saying be ignorant, but read it all, do it all, and make up your own mind and let God mess with you, and have a relationship with God yourself, and believe that God is. Because there's no question in my mind that God is. Yeah. And that'll take you down the road, and it'll be wonderful. May look a little weird, but it'll be nice. Yeah. Okay, turn the damn thing off.